My name is Lisa Peterson, and I am the Fishery Information System Program Coordinator. We also have Michael Liddel here, who is the FIS Program Director, and we are here today to talk to you about the FIS Electronic Technologies Catch Share Program FY 2024 Request for Proposals. This is, I believe, our fourth year doing a presentation like this. And it always seems to be helpful, so please give us feedback at the end of this if you are able to. We're always looking to improve. So I wanted to start this presentation just by talking about the Fishery Information System Program, or FIS, in general terms. So the FIS program is a state, regional, federal partnership supporting sound science-based fisheries management. And we do so by fostering collaboration and funding innovative projects to improve the quality of fisheries-dependent data. So it may seem counterintuitive to have a national program that helps facilitate improvements to data systems that are ultimately used to manage resources at the regional and state levels. But in actuality, it's this very regional structure that we have with fisheries that necessitates the type of collaboration and coordination that is facilitated by the FIS program. So we employ a governance structure shared across agencies and disciplines, and we facilitate cohesiveness and collaboration between agencies, regions, and disciplines, and drive participants to think about problems in new and holistic ways. Specifically, the approach helps to facilitate information sharing among regions so that solutions that help meet priorities in one part of the country can be applied to others facing similar issues. We support integration of data among coastal states and ensure that tools and resources are available to enable states and regions to help meet needs identified at the national level or comply with congressional or agency directives. I think of FIS as having two pillars. We have our professional specialty groups, which are cross-disciplinary teams that focus on specific fishery-dependent data challenges. And we have our annual request for proposals, which is what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So why do we use a competitive RFP process? So fisheries, by their very nature, have to be managed at the regional level. And the data programs supporting those decisions have to be based on the characteristics of the fishery being managed. However, that doesn't mean that each region should be completely independent from one another. In fact, just the opposite is true. So as we all know, resources are always very tight. There's always a lot of need for information sharing. And that sharing of information and reducing of inefficiencies is really an imperative. So that's what this RFP is really designed to achieve. The value in prioritizing funding of different pre-implementation and implementation projects through a central mechanism, as opposed to simply divvying out funds between the region, lies in the ability to look at the entire landscape of solutions underway. That enables us to avoid duplication of financial and intellectual resources and bring people together who may be working on similar problems and not know it, which is really what FIS is all about. It also opens the door to encourage cross-regional collaborations. And the way that we centralize the project tracking provides broad, easy-to-locate access to progress and final reports. So this RFP supports efforts by regions, science centers, states, and fishery information networks. Decisions on which projects receive funding are made by a team that is representative of all of those groups. So let's get into the RFP itself. So the FIS ET Catch Share Program RFP, so the very long acronym, represents that the RFP is really a collaboration among three different programs. The FIS program, the Catch Share program, and the Electronic Technologies program. This RFP is focused on fishery-dependent data, so that does include recreational as well as commercial data, again, as long as the focus is fishery-dependent data. So for FY24, we should have up to $5.5 million available, with, the ever-present caveat that that is pending appropriations. And generally speaking, this RFP includes a pre-proposal, a proposal, and there's also a leadership approval step that is required for both the pre-proposal and proposal. So who is eligible to apply? So NOAA Fisheries, the regional offices, the science centers, and headquarters offices are all eligible to apply. Our FIN partners, this is the Fishery Information Network, such as ACCSP, GulfFin, PacFin, are all eligible to apply. Our state partners, additionally, can apply directly for this RFP. The funding the funding for state partners is provided through the Interstate Commissions. So if you are a state partner, please check first to see if your commission has any sort of prior approval for submissions, but you are eligible to directly apply to this RFP. Other NOAA line offices are also eligible to apply, but again, the project must be fishery-dependent data related. So looking into the history of this RFP, this has been ongoing since 2013, and we have 5 main focus areas that I will be talking about in the next few slides. But we wanted to show this infographic just to illustrate that, we fund projects all over the country, in all regions and across a number of different focus areas, including electronic technologies, quality management, supporting our FINs, and data improvement projects. So lots of projects have been funded through time. I think we're at 200 and, right on this infographic, we're at 295 projects. So we're going to be breaking that 300 mark this year, most likely. So let's talk a little bit about the project categories. So we have 5 focus areas. So I'm going to be going through each of these one at a time. So first, the DIMI category. So this is our data improvements, modernization, and integration category. This is actually our newest category, and it was added in FY20 following the Fisheries Information Management Modernization, or the FIM workshop. As when that recommendation document came out, we added this focus area. So this category is really looking at data systems, not just data. And it's also a category to consider for projects that are addressing things like technical debt or legacy data systems. So some examples of projects that we have funded in this DIMI category are, last year we funded a Pacific Island Fisheries Science Center project that was called Modern Data Governance for the Pacific Islands Logbook Data. So the goal of this project was to improve access to comprehensive, high-quality, timely fisheries information by building a modern, user-friendly warehouse for the Pacific Island Center that supports fishery science and management in the region across the Pacific. We also supported a few integration projects. So the Southeast Fisheries Science Center, we funded a project to conduct the integration of the reef fish and shark observer programs with respect to the databases, analytical procedures, field protocols, and statistical sampling designs. So our next 2 focus areas are kind of fall under the umbrella of electronic technologies. The first is electronic monitoring, which typically means the use of cameras, hardware, and software to collect and process fishery-dependent data. So some of the projects we've funded in the past, specifically last year, was a project focused on video monitoring and counting system to evaluate ocean recreational fishing effort in Washington, in the state of Washington. We also supported a project that was looking at implementing electronic monitoring of clam catch in the Northeast, and this was using machine learning and image analysis. So it was a project that was an initial test of the ability of AI to differentiate the species and determine the length of 2 primary clam species caught commercially in federal waters in the Northeast Atlantic. So those are kind of the type, some examples of the EM projects we've funded in the past. The next category is electronic reporting. So that's typically considered the collection of harvest and biological data through electronic means. So some examples of this are the development of an electronic logbook in support of implementation of a new EM program in the North Pacific. We also are supporting a cross-regional project to develop a mobile development framework, governance policy, and standards for new and/or improving electronic reporting applications, such as logbooks, observers, dealers. And that's a collaborative project between the Northeast, the Southeast, the Atlantic Highly Migratory Species Program, and the Pacific Islands have joined that effort as well. The next category is Fishery Information Network, or FIN, development. And this covers national collaboration and coordination among FIN programs or with FIN programs, and include the development of quality assurance plans, data information management and dissemination, strategic planning, outreach, developing a review or improvement process. So really anything to do with the FINs. A project that we supported last year was the development of a data source registration application for the Pacific RecFin and PacFin databases. So a lot of the projects that come into this focus area are from the FINs, but they also have been from offices that are working with the FINs. So the final focus area is quality management and continuous improvement. And I want to spend a little bit more time on this focus area. So in the world of fisheries, we focus on quality management as a means of ensuring high quality data products. So we can't expect to just arrive at having a high quality data product instantaneously. It takes a lot of work by an office or an organization and its partners, and the likelihood of positive outcomes are really increased from investment into quality management processes. So QMCI principles are core aspects of QMCI that are necessary to have as a foundation for a culture of quality management and continuous improvement. And that includes leadership buy-in, organizational-wide commitments to QMCI, and a focus on stakeholder needs. These core principles feed the core strategies, such as training, documentation, and standards used to build a culture of quality. So both QMCI principles and strategies feed into the use of QMCI tools, which are used to put QM into practice. And finally, all three of these feed into the generation of quality data products. So it's important to note that these steps are very interrelated, and you can't have an effective quality management program without all four. So it's not enough, for example, to have staff using QM tools to inform data products if there's not organizational commitment or leadership support to implement a programmatic policy or other needed change that the use of the tools may have identified. So, and I wanted to take this moment to explain quality management and continuous improvement to you all, because as I'm sure you're inferring, while we have this as a specific focus area in the RFP, this is really something that you should be considering for any focus area that you're submitting for the RFP. So even if you're planning on submitting a electronic monitoring project, using the tools and the approaches of quality management and continuous improvement to develop that project can make your project more competitive and more well thought out, honestly. That's really the key thing with QMCI, is thinking about what you're trying to accomplish and being thoughtful about the steps you're taking to get to what you're trying to accomplish. So I really encourage you to search quality management on fisheries. You should be able to quickly find the Quality Management and Continuous Improvement Professional Specialty Group, which is a professional specialty group supported by FIS. So they have a website that lists tools and strategies for implementing QM in your office for your projects. And it also has a list of the members of that PSG who are always happy to discuss how to use QMCI in your everyday processes or in the big projects that you're trying to accomplish. So you can get to this website again from the fisheries website, or you can, there's a link to the FIS website at the end of this presentation, and from that website you can find the quality management site as well. So for this specific focus area though, these are kind of these are big projects that you want to implement a QMCI tool. So as I mentioned, quality management encompasses a suite of principles and tools that can guide and support an organization-wide commitment to continuous improvement. So whether you're trying to combine complex and divergent information streams into a single accessible data source, or creating a strategic plan to drive a good idea from the whiteboard to the field, QMCI can help solve those challenges faced by everyone who works with fisheries data. So if you're thinking of submitting a project under this focus area, projects we've supported in the past include strategic planning. So these are things like you want to have, a workshop where you bring stakeholders together to really think about a project or a program, and you want to, fly everyone to some central location. You want to bring in a facilitator who's really familiar with strategic planning. This is the focus area for you. Also, we've seen projects developing measures and metrics, or thinking about things like project management and collaboration. So again, I recommend that you think about how you can include QMCI in any project you're thinking of submitting for the RFP. And then this specific focus area is for those kind of larger scale projects where there's, an investment of funds that you need to, do a workshop or really make the improvements that you want to make. Again, I recommend reaching out to our professional specialty group. They have a lot of good information, and they're always very willing to share that with everyone and consult on projects, whether it's QMCI projects or bringing QMCI into a different focus area project. So I wanted to give just an example of projects that we funded under this focus area. So last year, the Office of Aquaculture received funding for completing a nationwide assessment and benchmarking of state-level marine aquaculture data reporting processes in the FINS. So they wanted to do a QMCI process to determine the constraints and potential solutions for optimizing efficient reporting and data quality. And I think a few years ago, we also supported the Gulf Fin strategic planning process. So this is a really useful focus area for making sure that your projects are successful. So that's why I wanted to spend a little bit more time on that one. And again, I'll probably say this a few times, but please, read the guidance document. There's a link to that on our webpage, and that has more in-depth descriptions of these focus areas. And as always, feel free to reach out to me or Michael with any questions that you might have when you're thinking about, which focus area your project fits into. So I also wanted to kind of take a step back and say, through these focus areas, this RFP really funds each phase of the project lifecycle. And really the goal of this RFP is to push projects, from over the humps that you hit with your project lifecycle. So going from pre-implementation to implementation, or doing that R&D of that, innovative idea that you came up with, or doing something like QMCI and evaluating, how can you improve? So last year we looked at 2 years of the RFP just to see, what kinds of projects we were funding, and we really saw that we are funding projects at every stage of the project lifecycle. So, again, think of this RFP as an opportunity to either do some R&D, do some testing of some innovative ideas, or get your project over past a barrier to get your project into implementation. All right, so what makes a good proposal? So the first thing I want to say is that, again, we have a guidance document for this RFP that is linked on the the website that again is linked in these slides. So if you open up the handout, and I think it might be the second to last slide, you should see the FIS website, or you can just Google it and you'll see the guidance document. So the guidance document is really useful for this answering this question as well, because it does provide the evaluation criteria that we use, that we provide for reviewers when your proposals are being scored. But we did want to take this opportunity to talk about some of the key things. So one, the project needs to fit within this RFP, essentially, which sounds simple, but is something that you need to think about and is something that we ask about on both the pre-proposal and full proposal. So you need to think about how your proposal supports FIS, the electronic technologies, or the catch share program's vision and the overall goals of this RFP, which is why I spent the time I did describing FIS and describing the goals of this RFP. We also take into account regional priorities. So, we want to be sure we're funding things that will have an impact and are really needed in your region. So being able to demonstrate that is good, either through, connections to wider NOAA strategic plans, more regional strategic plans, or your FIN or state strategic plans, or things like the Electronic Technologies Implementation Plan, or even something like the FIM, the Fisheries Information Management Modernization Recommendation Document. So we want to see that these projects are really needed and are, going to make an impact. We also do take into account leveraged resources, and I'm not just talking about money. I mean, obviously, if there's some in-kind support that you're planning on including for your project, that's a very important thing to include. But also just things like, is there going to be someone donating their time to this project? Are you using something that has already been developed by either a NOAA office or a FIN, and you're going to be using what's already been created to kind of build off of and use those resources to improve something that you're working on or take that project to the next step? So what are the resources that you're leveraging? We also really are looking for projects that are directly collaborative or indirectly collaborative. So, I described a electronic reporting project that came in that really is an East Coast effort that now has the Pacific Islands involved. It's very collaborative. Those are projects that we really support because, again, we're trying to reduce duplication of effort and make these dollars go as far as they can. We also think about that in terms of indirectly, though. So, is the project that you're planning on working on, maybe not something that's directly collaborative, but something that you could see being helpful for other regions? You'll want to be sure to describe that in your proposal. We also support the Lantern initiatives. So this is a NOAA thing, but Lantern is kind of the new way to, with the rotational assignments. So if your project could benefit from using a Lantern detail, that is something that we support with this RFP as well, and are willing to help kind of set up the Lantern description. So, for those of you who are familiar with that and think that that might be useful for your project, feel free to reach out and we can do some planning. A big thing, which maybe should be at the top of the list, is just having a very clearly articulated outcome. For the pre-proposal, we may not be looking for the super specifics of your methodology, but we do want to know, what is it that you are trying to achieve? Can you clearly articulate the goal of this project and the impact of this project? And because we want to be sure that we're funding things that are well thought out and that, have maximum chance of success. For the full proposal particularly, we also want to see proposals that have taken the time to put together a detailed budget. With the pre-proposal, this is not as much the case. We do, we anticipate those are going to be estimates because it's hard to know in the pre-proposal phase exactly how much things are going to cost. But for the full proposal, we want you to take the time to think about what are the costs of this project, what are the different cost categories, and if you talk to someone about what the cost, about your cost estimates, be sure to include that, because our reviewers are not budget analysts, but they do see a lot of proposals that come in, and so they are familiar with some of the general costs that are usually associated with different types of proposals. And so seeing a budget come in where clearly the submitter took the time to maybe talk to the budget people in their office or talk to someone who's done something similar to get really good estimates of how much things are going to cost goes a long way to making the reviewer, comfortable that you have really thought about this project and what the costs are going to be. And I think I said this at the beginning as well, but I will mention it again. The RFP guidance document is a really, really good resource for when you're putting together both your pre-proposal and full proposal. There's a description of the scoring criteria, and there's a description of each of the focus areas, and then there's a lot of really great links in there as well. So I did also want to take some time to talk about some of the changes for the FY24 RFP. So if you're listening to this talk and you've submitted to the RFP in the past, we actually added a couple of new fields for both the pre-proposal and full proposal for the FY24 cycle. And these came as a result of a FIS meeting we had where we brought everyone together who's part of the FIS community. And there were some themes that came up with regards to communication and transition planning that we decided we wanted to include in the RFP. So the goals of these new fields are to promote better communication with IT and to make sure applicants are thinking about transition. We want to be sure that people are thinking about what is going to happen to this project after the year of funding is over. So if you get funded, you're only funded for a year, what's going to happen after that? And so for the pre-proposal, we added just 2 yes or no questions just to get you thinking about these ideas. And so the first question is, will the finished product be supported and maintained by IT personnel inside or outside of an IT department? So for example, a new web application which will be deployed on NOAA's network. And we know that not all projects will have this, and that is fine. We just want to be sure that projects who are going to be supported by IT personnel are starting to think about, okay, what does that mean? Is there any security concerns? Where's the support for continued operations and maintenance going to come from? We want our submitters to start having those questions before funding is dispersed. So we want you to have those when you're putting together the plan for your project. So again, for the pre-proposal, this is just a yes or no question. It's not going to go into scoring or anything like that. It's really to get you thinking about it. But then in the full proposal, we are going to be asking you to just include a brief description of any discussions you've had with IT or similar, and again, including discussions about security or operations and maintenance costs. So similar to that, we also have included a question about transition planning. So again, pre-proposal, just a yes or no question, really to start to get submitters to start thinking about this for the full proposal. And when we say transition plan, we really mean both a specific description of the proposed product being created, any tasks needed after this project is completed to get the work into operations, and what funding and resources will be needed both for the transition itself and the operations and maintenance costs, and where that funding will come from, as well as a description of roles and responsibilities. So we actually did include a transition plan template that you are welcome to use, and then you can upload that as a supplemental document, but that is optional. We do recognize that not all projects will have a complicated or extensive transition plan, but we do believe that every project will have some sort of a closeout phase that we do want you to think about. So for example, the data is going to be archived or a paper is going to be published. And again, this isn't going to be used to score the pre-proposal. It's used as more of a reminder to start thinking about transition in anticipation of putting together a full proposal. And then the full proposal, we will be asking for either you to fill out the transition plan template, if that makes sense for your project, or to provide a brief description of what your transition plan is. So we know that we're kind of adding more work for our submitters, but these are things that we are hoping will improve the quality of the projects, as well as improve the kind of likelihood that the project will be successful. So we're just trying to push you to have these conversations that are needed. You know, we're not looking for IT sign-off, we're just looking for you to have a conversation. And then we're asking you to think about, you know, what's going to happen after the funding from FIS is no longer there. What happens after that year of funding? So those are the two main changes that we've made to the RFP for FY24. I also wanted to mention the metrics. So this has been, we've had a metrics tab, I think, for a couple of years now. So hopefully those of you who have submitted before are familiar with it. But for those of you who aren't, for the full proposal, we have a metrics tab that essentially is a bunch of checkboxes. And it's really for FIS to help FIS evaluate the anticipated impact of the projects in the RFP, and to be able to look at kind of multi-year comparisons of, you know, what are the types of things that we're funding essentially, and also as a way to strengthen the awareness of the benefits of the RFP. So we have, it's a bunch of checkboxes that's essentially asking what's the intended impact of your project. And I bring this up here because I always want to remind submitters to be kind of thoughtful and honest in responding to that. Because again, it's really just for FIS to use to see like what are the types of projects we're funding, what are, you know, is there any gaps that we're missing, or what are the, you know, what seems to be the priorities of the submitters, things like that. And it's not part of the proposal scoring. So please take the time to fill that out honestly. And again, that's only on the full proposal. Okay, so before I take you into PIMS, which is where you will be submitting pre-proposals, I wanted to give you the deadlines. So the pre-proposals are the first step, and those are due April 7th. After pre-proposals come in, we then have a leadership approval step where your local leadership will be contacted. So your FMC or your FIN leadership or your headquarters office leadership will be contacted just to review the pre-proposals, all the pre-proposals that came in, and approve them. So this step is really to make sure that your leadership is aware of, you know, the suite of proposals that are being submitted and what the different projects are. So then after that, the FIS program management team will be reviewing pre-proposals and will be providing submitters with feedback by the beginning of May. And so after you receive that feedback, the proposal submission will open, and the deadline for that is June 23rd. After the proposal deadline, we will have another leadership review step where, again, your local leadership will be provided with the suite of proposals that have come in, and they will have an opportunity to approve those and also provide a prioritization. So provide a medium, high, low priority for each of the projects. And this prioritization is really just used by the program heads when they're doing their funding decisions. Especially if things are close of, where to draw the funding line, that is when those prioritizations will be used or can be used. That's not used for the scoring, because after the leadership approval step, then we send the proposals out to a wide group of people from the FIS community and the ET communities. We try to get really good broad regional representation to review these proposals, and they will provide scores, and then that will be provided to the program heads, and then funding decisions will likely be announced late September or early October, and then funds are usually distributed in spring of the following year. So for FY24, funds would probably go out spring 2024. And all that, of course, is depending on appropriations. So that is the overall schedule for the RFP. So now I wanted to show you where you would be submitting your projects, your pre-proposals and your proposals. And that is in the Program Information Management System. So I'm actually going to change tabs here, and there, maybe. There we go. Okay. So you should be able to see the Program Information Management System tab. I'm actually going to show you something else real quick. So this is the FIS webpage. So if you come to the webpage on NOAA, and again, this is linked in these slides. There's a lot of good links here, including our professional specialty groups. This is where you can check out the Quality Management and Continuous Improvement website. There's also a link here that will take you to a data tool that will show you all of the previously funded projects as well as descriptions of those. So this can be really helpful too. A lot of good links in here, but I'm going to jump down to the bottom where you can see, maybe you can see that there's a link to the guidance document. So the FY 2024 Request for Proposal guidance document. So if you go here, that will take you to the guidance document. I recommend, if you're thinking of submitting, you download this as soon as you can, because there's a lot of good stuff in here. And I just wanted to draw your attention to a few things in here. So we have table of contents, so that gives you what all is in the document. And I'm going to scroll down to the second page where we have suggested resources. So here we have some instructions for how to submit an FIS proposal. We have links to templates. We have links to that database of past projects that I mentioned. We have a link to the seminar that I gave last year that's very similar to the seminar I'm giving currently, a link to our QMCI tools, a link to import, our commercial landings query tool, as well as the FIM tech memo. So this is a really good list of resources, particularly the templates. So the templates are also going to be linked in PIMS as well, but the templates for the pre and full proposal can be really helpful, especially if you're working on the proposals with other people. So using the templates is a good way to collaborate. So now we'll go over to PIMS. So again, this is where you will be submitting your pre and full proposals. If you've never used PIMS before, there's a self-register button. So you'll put your email, your NOAA email address in here and your NOAA email password, and you'll click self-register. And in this self-register thing, I recommend you go click on this link, how to submit an FIS proposal. So that will take you to some instructions. and it will give you a step-by-step guide on how to register with PIMS. So the really key thing that you probably can't see with the screen is to, when you're self-registering, there's going to be a question that says select your program. You have to be sure to select the RFP that you want to submit to. So this isn't your program. This is what RFP program that you want to link to, or that you want to have access to in PIMS. So you're able to do that if you're a NOAA user. If you are a non-NOAA user, then please email me or this email that's on the PIMS page, and we can set you up with an account in PIMS. So it's one extra step for non-NOAA users. But NOAA users, if you're having any trouble connecting to PIMS, then feel free to reach out to me and I can get you set up with an account. But once you have an account, you'll be able to log in with your NOAA email or your email and your NOAA email password. So once you hit log into that, I apologize, I want to make sure that I don't share the websites of other people in PIMS. But so when you log into PIMS, you should see a Programs tab. And under that Programs tab, you should see a Fishery Information System, Electronic Technologies, Catch Share Program, and you'll hit Open. So once you hit Open, okay, you should see up here on the top left a Submit Proposal. This is where you're going to be submitting your pre-proposal. And this is open right now, so if you're following along, you can even click this right now and start your pre-proposal draft. So when you click this, it will take you to what's essentially kind of a cover page for your pre-proposal. So I recommend giving it a succinct and descriptive project title. And then hit Create, which is down at the bottom left. And that should take you to this page where you can see all the fields for the pre-proposal, as well as the submit button up here at the top. I also want to draw your attention to some of the other buttons up here. So the template button will take you to a PDF of the templates. And in this PDF, if you want to get to the Google document at the very top, you can see the links to a Google document for the pre-proposal and the full proposal. And so this template, again, is really helpful. It provides all of the fields as well as all of the help text for all of the fields that you will need to fill out for your pre-proposal. And then if you keep scrolling down, you'll get to your full proposal fields as well. So if we come back to PIMS, this is where you'll be filling everything out. So if you use the template, you'll need to kind of copy paste or select in the drop downs your responses to these fields. And if you notice, there's a question mark next to a lot of these fields. This is where the help text also is. So you can see a bit of a description. Also at the top, we have a link to the guidance document as a PDF, as well as that transition plan template that I mentioned before that is optional. You're welcome to use it, but you also do not need to. So there's a 30-minute timer with PIMS, so be sure to save your changes regularly as you're filling this out. And once you have completed all of the fields, you'll hit the Submit button at the top. Your status should change to pre-proposal submitted. And after that, you will no longer be able to edit your pre-proposal. So this is also where you'll be putting in your full proposal. So again, once we have reviewed the pre-proposals and provided you with feedback, I will open up proposal submission, and you'll have an option up at the top that says start proposal. And so it'll show up on the side here again. It'll look very similar to this, just there'll be more detailed fields for the full proposal. The pre-proposal is kind of a lighter lift, it's shorter, and the full proposal has a little bit more in-depth questions. And in PIMS, this is also if your project does end up getting funded, this is also where you'll do your reporting, so things like quarterly reports, as well as your final report. So with that, I will end with this slide, which has the contact information for Michael, who's the program director of FIS, myself, the electronic technologies lead, Brett Alger, and the CatShare program lead, Lindsay Fullenkamp. You also can see the link to the FIS webpage up here at the top, and you can use that to get to pretty much all of the links that I have talked about in this presentation. So with that, I can take any questions.
So with that, Lisa, the first question we have is, when does the funding start and stop?
So the funding is provided for FY24, and usually the funding goes out in spring. So it's plus or minus a couple months, but usually it goes out in spring. And if you're a NOAA office, that money is supposed to be kind of allocated by the end of the fiscal year. The FINs and the states tend to have a little bit more flexibility, but for the NOAA offices, it is the year money.
Thank you. Next question we have is related to the different categories of programs offered. If a project seems to apply in more than one category, do you have any tips on how to choose which one it would be most applicable for?
So that is a great question. So obviously, if it applies mostly to one focus area, you should use that as your guidance. But I will say that if you look in the guidance document, there is a kind of breakdown of how much funding is in each focus area. So the electronic technologies focus area tends to have a larger pot of money, although it does tend to also be more competitive. So that is something to keep in mind as well, that if it is a large budget item project that you're considering, and say it could be, both a QM project and an EM or an ER project, that you might want to consider the EM or ER just because it has a larger pot of money available for those projects. And that breakdown is in the guidance document. I will also say that especially if the question is kind of the EM versus ER versus DIMI versus the data improvements category, that reaching out to myself or Brett, particularly if it's an electronic technologies question, is really helpful because we have a lot of insight into what project would fall within what category. I also want to mention that when the pre-proposals come in, the reviewers for the pre-proposals are going to be looking at which focus area you submitted under and providing any feedback, like if they think that, it won't be like a negative with the pre-proposal, but if you submitted something to one focus area and the reviewers feel like it would fit better in a different focus area, that feedback will be provided to you. And for the full proposal, you can change which focus area you are submitting to. So that can be really helpful as well.
Thank you. The last question we have is related to funding, and it's, can proposals include NOAA and non-NOAA partners with funds going to different entities?
So that is another great question. So the projects can include both NOAA and non-NOAA partners. That we encourage that. We have a lot of projects where the submitter might be from the Northwest Center and they're partnering with the FIN. So they have PAC states people as partners on the project. As far as where the funds go, what we usually do is we provide the funds to the submitting office, and then from there they're able to disperse the funds where they need the funds to go to. If you are thinking of being a little bit more complicated and wanting some funds to go one direction and other funds to go another direction, we have a field on the full proposal where you can describe that process or describe that request. We don't make any guarantees, but for example, we had a project last year where it was submitted by actually the Northwest Center, and they actually wanted the funds to go to Pacific states. And so they requested that instead of the funds going directly to the Northwest Center for them to then figure out, they wanted the funds to be directly towards PAC states. So that's an option. If you're thinking of splitting, that is a little more unusual, but definitely something we would consider. But please describe that in your proposal, and maybe if you have an idea with your pre-proposal of what you're thinking, reach out to myself and Michael as to what you're thinking, and we can start making some plans on how we could make that work. But as far as like who can be partners on the project itself, it does not have to be all NOAA people. It can be NOAA and non-NOAA participants.
Lisa, thank you so much. I don't see any other questions coming in, so we can end a couple minutes early. Just a big thank you to you. This presentation was fantastic, and thank you for Michael as well. And to all of our attendees, thanks for taking some time out of your day to be with us. This was fantastic, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Shannon.
Thank you.